Hi folks, it's Tim Kitchen here, and I'm very, very pleased to be working here with DLTV, Digital Learning and Teaching Victoria, with this topic, preparing for the future workplace. And it is a topic that I'm very passionate about. And just by way of introductions, I've been in education now for 30 years. Now, I know you find that very hard to believe, because if you look closely at me, I look like I'm only 15 years old. And the reality is, when I started teaching, I was only 5. So that kind of explains why I look so young. But I've been a primary teacher, I've been a secondary teacher, I've been a university lecturer, and for the last 7.5 years, I've been working for Adobe as their senior education specialist for the Asia Pacific region. And it's been an incredible journey. And one of the great things I've been able to do in that time is preach the word of Sir Ken Robinson. And I've had the opportunity to meet with him 3 times in the last 8 years. And every time I've met with him, it's been like, whoa, just such an awe-inspiring experience. And to learn from the man directly, I've read all of his books, and it was so sad to hear about his passing last weekend. It came as a shock to everyone, really. He had a bout of cancer, which we didn't know about. And unfortunately, that he wasn't able to survive that. But he has an amazing legacy. And if you haven't heard of Sir Ken Robinson, I highly recommend you look him up, and particularly look up the 2006 TED Talk that he did. It's the most watched TED Talk ever in the history of TED Talks. And every time I see it, it's a 20 minutes where you won't be disappointed, put it that way. It was such an inspiring presentation, and it's inspired many educators since then to focus on the importance of creativity in education. So we're talking about preparing for the future workplace. And one of the most important areas in terms of preparing students for the future is this concept of creativity. So I'd like to know from you, I'd like to find out from you in the chat at different times during this session, how important is creativity to you? How is creativity fostered? How is it encouraged in your school? Is it encouraged? Or is creativity something that's left for the arts or the media teachers who naturally would be teaching creativity? One of the things that Sir Ken Robinson said is that creativity is everywhere. It's in every aspect of the curriculum, and we should be encouraging it in maths and science, in humanities, in law. It's so important to be encouraging creativity. The only thing that I would say you probably don't want to be encouraging creativity is when you're teaching accounting, but that's another subject altogether. So let's have a look at what I've got prepared for you. I'm just giving you a couple of bits of information here. So I'm Dr. Tim Kitchen, Senior Education Specialist at Adobe. There's my email address if you ever want to get in touch, kitchen@adobe.com. And Daryl, I'll get you to put that in the chat if you don't mind. And then I've got a blog that I maintain pretty regularly at timkitchen.net. And Daryl, if you wouldn't mind putting that in too. That would
Onto it now, yep.
Thank you, sir. And lots of information there of the work that I'm able to do. I'm in a very privileged position because I get to work in schools and universities literally all over the world. And when I'm not isolated here in Melbourne, where I live, I do travel. I travel every week, whether it's around Australia or whether it's around the Asia Pacific region or whether it's in the United States. And the opportunities to engage with students and with teachers from all over the world has really opened up so many opportunities. And I really enjoy these chances to share what I'm hearing from teachers and from students around the world with people like yourself, which is always a wonderful opportunity. Have a look at this picture that we've got here. How does this image of a modern workplace compare to our classrooms? Just keep that in mind as a question, and maybe go into the chat, give us a quick response. What's your immediate response when you look at that picture of the modern workplace? And this could be the Adobe office in Sydney. We've got a brand new office in Melbourne that we're currently moving into, or soon will be when we go out of isolation. It'll look exactly like this. I've seen the plans. I've been in now 10 of the Adobe offices around the world, maybe more. There's 55 of them. I've been in about 10 of them. They all look like this. I've been in the Google offices around the world. They all look like this. I've been in the Microsoft offices around the world. They look like this. This is a very common modern workplace environment. How does this compare to our classrooms? Let's have a look at some of the responses. And then if you would like to say something, then we'd love to hear from you as well. We've got collaborative, decentralized, collaborative again, range of age groups, flexible seating, same as some classrooms, but not the majority. Dynamic, people responding to multiple stimuli, not controlled by one where masses react to limited stimuli. Interesting, Paul. Free, not trapped, collaborative again. Still desk-based, that's interesting. Bright and light, staff are so relaxed, happy and discussing. What else we got here? Sian saying we're the same. Sandra saying no sound at all. I'm not that sure if that's referring to the picture here, but poor old Sandra, I don't know. Obviously you can't hear us, but Daryl, if you wouldn't mind commenting.
Yeah, we're working on that at the moment, Tim. Not sure what's going on.
You could just log out and log back in. It usually fixes it.
Yeah, Sandra's tried that before, but the second time's around. Anyway, we'll keep going with her.
No problems. Sophia saying use of paper, question mark. Sophia, do you want to open up your microphone and expand on that a little bit?
I think it's interesting. Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
I think it's interesting in our day and age, we still use paper for some respectful areas that we need to, and I think it's still important that we do that, but there needs to be a balance.
Absolutely, yeah. Do you think there's getting a balance, or do you think it's still very much on the paper side?
Oh, well, at the moment, we've got a lovely balance because there's a majority of students just working digitally, but there's also a lot of schools doing paper packs out to class sets of children too. So I'm not sure. The school that I'm teaching at North Geelong use iPads and quite a few digital resources. So they're very good with that respect and using the Google Classroom so they don't have to produce a piece of paper just for the sake of reading it.
Yeah.
So I find that's quite useful.
Well, looking at the picture that we've got in front of us now, there is some paper there.
Yes.
It's not as if we're not using paper in the modern office. I must admit, it's rare. There's not many printers left in the Adobe office in Sydney. There's one in Melbourne.
Desktops?
It's all laptops. Everything's laptops, and what they provide is screens, an extra screen, keyboard, and a mouse for everyone. It was very much a hot desk type environment, which will change because with COVID, I think the hot desk might be phased out. Just a little bit worried about how we're going to be sharing keyboards and mice, so to speak. But that is the modern workplace. It's all about laptops. The reason for that is because we don't want our employees just to be clocking in at 9 and finishing at 5. With the laptop, they take it home. It's all the time. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's another debate, but that is the reality of the modern workplace. You're constantly on, and you need to manage your time your way. In saying that, there's a lot of flexibility in the modern workplace. You don't have to start at 9. You don't have to finish at 3:30 or 5 o'clock. One of the things I found really interesting when I moved from being a full-time classroom teacher to then suddenly working in this environment at Adobe was I still kept waiting for the bell to go so I knew I could have lunch. I still kept thinking, should I be getting up at 6 o'clock so I can make sure I can start directly at 7:30 or 8 o'clock like I did as a teacher? But no, I could actually sleep in if I needed to, knowing that I'd probably end up working till 10 or 11 o'clock the next night. But it was very flexible. And my manager, when I first started at Adobe, was in San Francisco. So there was no direct, that. She had no idea when I got up or how much work I did. As long as I was being productive, that was the important thing. That's really interesting, the different correlations there. Thank you very much for sharing that. Just having a look at some of the other comments that we've got. Liz is saying, I feel that some school leaders encourage teachers to utilise a variety of classroom layouts, but there is a fear, I think, and can I be bothered to change the seating? Takes too long. Yeah, that's true. And some people have a preference for paper. Yeah, absolutely. Most people probably do in a traditional sense. Kevin's trying to help there. Agree with Sophia. Ari, the paper at the moment, the intensity of online screen time at the moment is hard for teachers and students. It is, yeah, for sure. Lisa, just curious, do they cater for the introverts in the world? That's a good question, Lisa. When you've got your own hot desk space, that's not your own really. There are some areas where you can go to have your own sort of private space. There are rooms that you can book to have meetings and so on, or you could be working from home. So there's a lot of remote working that comes in. So I guess introverts can be catered for in that way. Good question. Let's see what else we've got. In fact, Daryl, can I get you to keep an eye on the chat as we progress through here and just see if there's anything key that comes up for discussion?
Sure.
What I'd like to do, folks, is just share with you some research that came out of the World Economic Forum. They meet every 2 years. We're talking about political leaders, business leaders around the world that get together in Europe every 2 years. But every 5 years, they do a survey and they try to work out what are the most important skills to thrive in the future. And this has been going for a number of years now. And this is results from about 4 or 5 years ago. The 5th most important skill, coordinating with others. The 4th most important skill, people management. 3rd most important skill, creativity. And we're talking about business leaders here. We're talking about political leaders. 2nd most important skill, critical thinking. Thinking for yourself, as opposed to just accepting everything that's being presented to you. Have a go at the chat. Tell us what you think is the number 1 most important skill according to the World Economic Forum. It's been publicized for many years, so I'm hoping some people have seen this before, but let's just see if anyone's brave enough to give us their answer. Keep in mind, these are all called soft skills as such, so keep that in mind. So if you type in digital technology, that's probably not going to be, or digital literacy, it's probably not going to be the actual answer. It's not considered a soft skill as such. Poor Sandra, she's having real struggles. Anyone game enough to give us another response? Collaboration kind of fits in with skill number 5 there. Adaptability, it's a soft skill for sure. It kind of relates to, it's not in the top 5, I would say. In that sense, it's probably in the top 10. I just can't remember the second lot. I'll take you out of your misery. It is complex. Oh, there we go. Well done, Lisa. Problem solving. Just got there. Problem solving. And so this is really interesting to think about, how does this connect with us as educators? Are we providing opportunities for our students when we set assessments, when we create project opportunities? Are we providing them with the opportunity to develop their collaboration skills, their people management skills, their creativity skills, their critical thinking, and their problem solving? And some of us do this really well, but when I look at different schools and talk to teachers literally around the world, there is still this mindset that, no, I'm the teacher. I need to be able to assess every individual student to give a report to them and to get them ready for some sort of test or an exam or some sort of standardized testing that will prove that they know what I've been teaching them. That's been the mindset in our education system for many years. Still continues to be, but is that the best mindset? Is that preparing students for the future? It certainly helps teachers, and it's very black and white, and especially if you're a maths, and we've got some math teachers with us, it's fairly clear how you should do that. But I wonder if we give our students more opportunities to do teamwork assessments, would that be better preparing them for the future? The argument to get back straight away is, yeah, but how do I assess a team situation? Well, I think back to when I was teaching full time. I used to do that all the time. it wasn't just my assessment that was important in the finished grade. And I'm talking about teaching year 10, 11 and 12, not just teaching primary school or early secondary school. There's so many opportunities for us as educators to provide our assessment, but what about peer assessment? What about self-assessment? What about when you're working in a team and getting the rest of the team to assess the whole team? All of that is so important, and yet we often find it a little bit too difficult. And my challenge, I guess, is that if we can get over those difficulties, if we can readapt our assessment criteria so that self-assessment, peer assessment, and teacher assessment are almost at an equal level, that's better preparing our students for the future. That's offering so many opportunities for coordination, for people management, and for creativity. There's one thing I used to do in every assessment at year 12. I had this feature called the X factor. It was 10% of any marking that I would do as a teacher, any sort of internal marking that I was allowed to do. 10% of it would be the X factor. And the kids would say to me, "What's the X factor?" And I'd say, "If the hairs on the back of my neck stand up when I look at your work, you're going to get 10 out of 10 for that 10%. And some of the students would just freak out at that concept where it's not black and white. They had to really think about it and then be creative about how they would match and get to that criteria. And that was interesting to see which students would thrive in that environment and which students just couldn't cope because they just needed to be directed all the time. And that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to get students to be so much more self-directed so that they are prepared for the future. Because the fact is, when they go to university, they're not going to have teachers hovering over them, making sure they understand and know the content before they sit the test. When they get into a workplace, they're certainly not going to have a manager looking over them all the time. Like I said before, mine was in San Francisco. So that concept of self-direction is so, so important, and we really need to be less spoon-feeding and more preparing our students for that environment. Let's have a look at the discussion, Daryl.
Sorry, I was just going to bring up that Sophia mentioned resilient learning, and Michelle recently had a leadership meeting or a discussion about dispelling the myth. And your point about the 10%, when I taught media, if a student's photograph or a piece of work they described or showed me, and I just went, it was funny, I had a different reaction to photograph than video. When I saw a student's photo, it was almost immediate. Oh my God, that is fantastic. But when it was a video, it would be a slow burn to being, wow. It's the hairs on the back of your arm that makes that sort of thing as a teacher so much worthwhile. But Sophia's point about resilient teaching and your notion of what you discussed then about not having someone looking over your shoulder is quite interesting. You do have to be resilient.
Yeah, I'm experiencing that with my daughter. She's just finished year 12. She's now studying law at Deakin University. Oh boy, the change from doing year 12 at a private girls' school in Melbourne to suddenly being at university, unbelievable. Where she was literally, I don't want to mention the school, but so guided, so hovered over the whole time, not just by her parents, but by her teachers to get her. And she got some fantastic results. But now at university, she has to manage it herself, and it's a huge gap between getting them ready for university. And yeah, interesting. Anything else there, Daryl, to mention before we go on?
No, unless Michelle or Sophia wanted to sort of talk a little bit more about their comments.
Michelle, you said dispelling this myth. Which myth are you referring to?
Yeah, so at the beginning of that conversation, you were talking a little bit about the notion of what we think that we need to know everything, that we need to know everything in order to teach the kids, and dispelling that myth with the teachers that it's okay that they don't know everything related to the tools and digital technologies, and that we're quite possibly never going to catch up to their skills in many ways, particularly for a lot of staff who don't have strong digital literacy, and that's absolutely okay. and that we need to take the fear out of teaching for our staff and for our teachers, that they don't need to have every answer to every question, and that we need to build the resources in the kids in order for them to develop and create and collaborate to build their own solutions. So that's something that we're really looking at addressing.
Yeah, that's so true, and that's been a big point of Sir Ken Robinson's been talking about this for many years now, how as teachers we are facilitators of knowledge. We're not the directors of knowledge. We need to de-Googlify our curriculum, where if you're giving them content that they can just quickly look up on their phones or their iPads to get the answers for, how's that helping them? How is that preparing them for the future? So that if that's the mindset of the teacher, then that teacher is going to become redundant very quickly. That's just the way technology is and the way the world is going. So we need to rework that. And we have been reworking that for many years now. So I'm glad to hear that your school is bringing that up as a discipline, as a leadership discussion. Sophia, do you want to talk about resilient learning?
Perhaps we could call that a myth as well in some ways. I think that for years we've tried to come up with some answers to help with creating resilient learners. I think a long time ago we potentially had some resilient learners, but they learnt because of the wrong reason. Whereas the creativity side of things, like you were talking about, all of those areas of that you're talking about with your critical thinking, creative thinking, all of those, it's interesting that they're actually key skills required in the data analysis VCE subject, and wouldn't it be amazing if they were already skills that were taught at lower levels, so that students or children actually had those skills going through with learning, no matter whether it was digital or not.
Very true. Thanks, Sophia. All right, so they're called soft skills, but I would argue that they shouldn't be called soft skills. I would argue they should be called vital skills. Because when we use the word soft, we often think, oh, well, maybe they're not that important. And there's a bit of an issue there. So in the language that we talk about with these skills, we need to be careful. So the question is, how often are we developing these skills in our classrooms? And we've had a good chat about that. Good picture here of almost a typical classroom. There's a bit of technology there. There's a bit of engagement, but also not so much engagement. But what I don't like about this picture is the fact that the teacher's at the front of the room. There's time for that, absolutely, and that's important, but not all the time. And it's real. Well, we can tell with one picture, but it's really important that we're breaking up the content. I used to teach media, and I now teach video production to a lot of people, and I get to work with people who are working in the industry. So every television network in Australia uses our products to create television. Every video producer in Australia uses our products to make commercials and so on. And there's a rule in video production called the 7-second rule. And that is that no image should be on the screen for any longer than 7 seconds. And in fact, that rule has been brought down to, someone did a PhD research on this. They analysed the average length of an edit in film and television, not commercials, because that's different, but in film and television, the average length of an edit, how often an image is on the screen, is 3.2 seconds. Now, the reason for that is our attention span. Our attention span is about 7 seconds on average before we start to lose interest. Now that is that's very variable, and of course a lot of students are a lot bigger and some are a lot shorter. It's an interesting point for us as teachers to realise, though, when we are standing in front of class, we're presenting something. After about 7 seconds, some of our students will start to glaze over. They're very good at pretending they're listening. They're very good at looking as though they're doing the right thing, but not a lot's necessarily going in there. And so that's just an interesting point that comes up. Here's Sir Ken. Creativity now is as important in education as literacy. That's something he's been saying for a number of years, and that came out of his TED Talk in 2006. And it was a controversial statement back then. Now, not so much. Now we're realizing just how important creativity is. And of course, we were very sad to hear about his loss on Sunday morning when the news came out to us. But what I'm doing tomorrow night is I do a I do an online show every Wednesday night for teachers, and we're dedicating the whole show to Sir Ken and his life. And I'm very, very lucky to have Peter Hutton and Dan Hassler. I don't know if you've come across the work of Peter Hutton or Dan Hassler before, but whenever Sir Ken's been out here in recent times, those two gentlemen have been with him, on panels with him. They've worked with him. They probably know him better than any other Australian, really. They're both going to be joining me tomorrow night on the show, sharing what influence he's had on their lives. And so I might just grab that link actually and put it into the chat if you are interested to be there. You can find out some more information about it and share that with your colleagues if you're interested. At last year's Edutech conference...
Tim, will there be a record?
Yes, I'll be recording different chapters.
Tim, I was just going to ask, will there be a... Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, no worries. At last year's Edutech conference, which it's a fairly controversial conference because it's very expensive. So not many teachers can actually go to it. It's usually curriculum coordinators, principals and so on who come. And but Sir Ken was there. He was the keynote presenter, and this photo I took at the event. At that conference, he said this: students are full of boundless and astonishing potential, and we only ever really understand and tap into a small amount of it. He said, human resources are like the world's natural resources. They are highly diverse, often buried and can be hidden entirely. When you discover them, you have to develop and refine them. The kind of education our children are getting is not fit for purpose. And we are doing them and our teaching profession a massive disservice by being part of a culture which we know is averse to the natural growth and development of children and to the things they really need to learn and be able to do. Pretty big statement. What are your thoughts? Go into the chat. Just give us your initial reactions. Is that something you agree with, or do you think, no, that doesn't resonate with me at all? Let's have a look at your different responses. Maybe a little bit of music in the background while you're thinking about your contribution to that. If you want to just say something, that's fine too. You don't have to type it down. Looks like it's all very quiet there, Daryl.
Yes, does seem to be, although I am typing, so I wonder whether people are just a bit slow to type. Oh, we got something from Robert here.
Robert says, I agree. Predominantly, we teach in our silos and tend to stay in our comfort zone. Yeah. I found that really interesting when I moved from being a primary teacher to being a secondary teacher. As a primary teacher, it was teaching the whole language approach. It was when I was teaching English, I was also teaching science and geography. But when I became an IT teacher in a secondary environment, I was siloed straight away and said, you're not to go and communicate with those people. Fortunately, that culture has changed, but gee, that was massive when I made the change in the year 2000. Paul McLean. Is that the famous Paul McLean from New Zealand? If developing creativity in children was likened to profit, operating grades between churned Victorian Revolution model means we've made a big loss. It is. Hello, Paul. I think you're on mute there.
G'day, Tim. How are you, sir?
Very well. Lovely to have you join us.
Oh, thank you very much. I've I felt privileged to sneak in on your invite when I saw it come through. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Paul's an education consultant based out of Auckland and doing some amazing work with teachers. Thanks for that comment, Paul. Anything else you want to
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for inviting.
Did you want to share something else about that?
Oh, no, nothing. No, I just think it's a great discussion, actually. I think there's a lot of similar things to what we've got going on down in NZ, as you well know. And developing creativity is the hot discussion point, but the key question is on how do we actually convince, persuade, get alongside leaders who may not necessarily wish to do that. And that's the big challenge we face, and had it today, yesterday, and the last 10 years.
That's true.
Yeah. Margaret makes a similar point there, Paul, where she talks about how do we manage the societal pressures to teach the 3 R's.
Absolutely.
There's a real...
I totally agree. I mean, we had some discussions in previous sessions with Tim around, in New Zealand's case, and probably in Australia as well, with the COVID situation and our tourism challenges in dairy. It's now absolutely critical we abruptly, in my opinion, rethink creativity and education to develop the talent we need to think about digital exports. And the alarming statistic last year, and we're getting some updates, dropped to 25th in the world for all layers of knowledge diffusion across the system, i.e. we're not developing talent. But 2 weeks ago, we had more announcements around standardized testing through online systems. So it's energized me to get back out there on the campaign trail, so to speak, and really hit that road hard around how is that actually going to develop talent? Well, it's not. So let's rethink what we're doing.
It's very political, doesn't it? I was looking at very interested in the education reforms that were meant to be coming out of New South Wales recently. I was really excited about the possibility because they were totally relooking at the curriculum. I've met the minister in New South Wales. I've worked with Mark Scott, the Secretary of Education in New South Wales. They are fantastic people. But then I heard the press conference and the Premier comes up and says, we're going back to basics. She used that term, and everything was squashed. And I could almost see the minister, I could see her just really uncomfortable, but having to toe the line. And Mark Scott, I could sense that he was uncomfortable too, because he's a very good positive thinker and he's very much agreeing with a lot of this philosophy. But the politics, it's so hard. Got to get back to basics. And that's what parents like to hear, because that's what wins votes.
Absolutely.
Interesting. All right. Part of the problem is... Sorry,
I was just going to say, Tim, Kate makes a point on that point, PL for parents to assist with that sort of thinking around, structured NAPLAN and those sorts of things. And Liz made a really interesting comment, I thought, what's the purpose of education? She was asked once whether prison was effective, and that all depends on its purpose.
Yeah, all interesting points. With the extra part that Sir Ken was talking about at last year's Edutech, he said part of the problem is parental attitudes, which comes out in what Kate's saying. I think parents want to do the right thing for their kids, but they think the right thing is what they went through, even though they probably didn't enjoy it all that much. Interesting statement there. And what I've also noticed and reflected on over the years is that a lot of teachers have been quite successful in the education system. They've come through it. They've done their year 12, they've gone to university, and they've decided, well, I actually enjoyed this experience, so I'm going to become a teacher again. I'm going to go back into schools. And that, I'm wondering if that's such a healthy thing, because we seem to be then repeating a system that worked well for us. But when you look at the research, does it work well for everybody? No, we know that. Does it work well for the majority? Well, that's arguably not the case. And we know back when I went into university, which was a long time ago, there was only 12% of students that actually went into university. So does that mean that the education system was only successful for 12%? So Ken Robinson says, the education system is all based around creating university professors, which is crazy when you think about it. Is that what we want every student to be, a university professor? Surely not. And so that raises some really interesting points. Let's have a look at what Margaret's saying here. As long as the health of our education systems are measured by testing such as NAPLAN, we will struggle to address creativity. Interesting you say that. I've got a couple of statements about that in a sec. Daryl, just give us a time warning when you can. That'd be good. So Ken says they think the right thing is for everyone to go to university and get a degree. Often out of the best of intentions, our kids and therefore our teaching profession is under constant stress and anxiety, which is terrible, but repairable if we think about education in a different way. This is the point on standardised testing I'd like to make, and this is a little bit controversial. I hope you don't mind. Standardised testing is a multi-billion-dollar business. I don't know if you've thought about it that way. In 2013, in the US, $16.5 billion, that's US dollars, combined earnings from publishing companies that publish material for standardized testing. And in the US, they have a number of different tests that students have to go through, much more than what we have to do. The same year, the US cinema box office earned $11 billion. Same year, the US cinema box office, oh, I've said that twice, sorry. So that's an interesting comparison, how when you look at how much money the cinemas are making, Hollywood is making, compared to how much money publishers are making just out of standardized testing. So there's the political issue there. If we got rid of standardized testing, as Sir Ken is arguing, there is a huge pressure from publishing companies alone to keep it going. And that raises a whole different scheme of different area of thinking. And Cleo's saying, totally agree with Sir Ken on this point. I think that people's understanding of training, university and traditional qualifications are changing rapidly. They are, and that's often because the university degree is not anywhere near as significant or as important as it was in the past. I know that when we employ people at Adobe, we don't necessarily look at what their university degree is or what results they got. It is important to have one. It just proves that they can learn to learn. That's the significant part of doing a university course. But when we're looking at employing someone maybe as a customer success manager, we don't really care what university degree they've done or how well they've done, just that they've actually done it. And I know that Google, they're looking at much more at the portfolio that the person has produced as opposed to any formal qualifications. That's an interesting change that's happening at the highest level of corporate work. Anthony's saying, I went into teaching and taught the opposite to how I was taught. Good on you, mate. That's great to hear. May's saying standardized tests doesn't allow students to show their full potential. Yeah, and it's a real stress for a lot of students. Absolutely. Daryl, how are we going for time?
Tim, there's about 15 minutes
Terrific.
left, but we're open to staying longer if you're prepared. I was just thinking about that. When you're talking about creativity and the importance of it, I remember an interview with Mickey Dolenz, who was one of the selected people for the TV show The Monkees. I wonder if you remember that.
Mm-hmm.
When they were selecting those people, they weren't even interested in their musicality. They just wanted zany, creative people to be part of the process. Yeah. And I think sometimes we overlook that. And just added that. I was going to type it, Tim, but I just said it.
That's fine. We like to think that we can train a lot of people on the job. The skills will always change. The technology will always change. But creativity is not something you can teach on the job. It's something that you develop over years. And if you've got a creative mindset, you are very employable and you are very moldable in a sense. And we can always teach you the hard skills. Very hard to teach later on the soft skills, which is why it should be focused on in education. Peter Hutton's a friend of mine. He'll be on my show tomorrow night talking about Sir Ken, and he's doing some incredible work with the alliance of the Future Schools Alliance. He was the principal at Templestowe High School, and those of us in Victoria, which is the main audience we have here, would probably know the story of Templestowe High School, how they totally changed the system, totally changed the way that students learnt to the point where when you start at year 8, you have you yourself choose your learning path at year 8 for what you want to be doing, and then it's based on that. So if you're in year 9, you could be starting your physics, your VCE physics subject. You could start, if you had a passion for it, why wait until year 11? Why wait until year 10? Why not start your physics component in year 8 if that's your passion? And he made it work. And now he's got about 60 schools around Australia that he's working with, and leaders within those schools to try and change the system, try and rethink education. He's doing some incredible work. Might have a quick chat now about automation, because that's often talked about when we think about preparing students for the future, and the fear that computers are going to take over the world, and the fear that automation is going to get rid of lots and lots of jobs. Well, in some cases, that is the case. But let's have a look at some of the research. 2013 study from Oxford, the future of employment, how susceptible are jobs to computerization? They estimate that 47% of jobs are at risk of being automated in the next 20 years. The CEDA, the Committee for Economic Development of Australia, their 2015 study, they said that more than 5 million jobs could disappear in the next 10 to 15 years because of technological developments. Computerization and automation could see more than 6 out of 10 jobs in rural and regional Australia vanish. That's an interesting observation. I've got to do a talk tomorrow to a whole group of students at Wangaratta High School, a virtual talk, part of the Big Day In events. And the focus is, how do we prepare students in regional areas for the future? And do they need to come into the big cities to work? And the good news for them is that they don't. Thanks to the internet, thanks to technologies, sure, we're losing lots of jobs, but there's so many opportunities out there for these students to then take up new jobs and create new jobs. A guy that I've met several times, in fact, we had him keynoting a number of VITA conferences. Before there was DLTV, there was VITA and ICTIV, and Professor Yong Zhao would come out to Australia regularly. He would come to Templestowe College regularly to talk to the staff and the students there too. He's written 7 books on entrepreneurialism and the importance of having an entrepreneurial mindset when you're teaching, and encouraging your students to think entrepreneurially and not wait until they've done university or they've finished school to start a small business. Do that now. Work out what your passion is and turn that into a job while you've got that passion. And sure, you might fail, but what's wrong with that? Especially when you're a teenager. There's no fear in failing your small business when you're a teenager. In fact, the more you fail, the more you learn. And one of the things I say to young people, particularly when they're finishing off schooling and starting university and even finishing university, is on your resumes, make sure you record any time you've been involved in a small business, because that looks amazing to a potential employer out there. Oh, we're seeing a picture of rural Victoria now, are we? That's great. And it's so important to encourage your students to think about what their passions are, and then to focus on them and turn them into a job. And that's how you're going to beat this idea of automation being a huge fear factor. In 2017, there was a report by PricewaterhouseCoopers titled Workforce of the Future, the Competing Forces Shaping 2030. They surveyed 10,000 people across China, India, Germany, and UK and the US with an aim to better understand the future workplace. They said 37% said that they thought artificial intelligence and robotics would put their jobs at risk. The big question is, should we see automation as a threat? Do we really want to be training students for jobs that can be done better by a computer anyway? And that's a different sort of bent on it, I suppose. Let's have a look at the chat. Maybe give us some of your responses. Do you think automation is a threat, or is it an opportunity for change? Maybe just a little bit of time to reflect on that as we think about how we're preparing our students for the future. Feel free to open up your microphone if you'd like to comment.
Tim, it's interesting. I'm actually from up near Wangaratta, and one of the biggest issues is access to the internet. I'm not there now, but it's certainly the fact that my sister and I are in Melbourne was because we didn't have access to everything.
Yeah. Is that improving, or is that still a huge problem?
They've finally got 4G in most places. It's actually better than my house here, where I am in Melbourne. But yeah, it's still really, really slow. And it's not as accessible. In Wang's a bit better, but if you're slightly more rural, I know a lot of friends that are trying to teach in those areas and they can't do it from home. Yeah, or not the way that we've got it at my school anyway. Not every class on Zoom or Teams.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a challenge, and it will continue to be a challenge. Eventually, that will improve as our technology develops. As we develop 5G in our cities, then 4G will become more accessible later on, just in terms of the technology. NBN has been very, very helpful in lots of ways, but it's just not reaching a lot of areas because of the costs and so on. So it is an issue, absolutely, but it is improving gradually. I guess the good news is that rural students probably don't need to come into big cities to do future work. They could go into the local town. So Wangaratta is a good example of a big town in northeast Australia, where people who are out in those farms, or those students who are out in very rural towns, it's not so far for them to travel into Wangaratta and set it up where they're going. Universities have a huge role here as well to encourage more campuses, more courses out in rural Victoria and rural New South Wales. Charles Sturt University is doing a fantastic job around New South Wales, setting up campuses. And but everyone's also struggling with that whole connectivity issue, and hopefully that will improve over time. Robert saying automation is an opportunity.
Robert makes.
Yeah, go on.
I was just going to point out what Robert said, Tim. So that's
opportunity to give as the ability to focus on creativity and problem solving. Yeah, nice. I was talking about local hubs.
Well, I know Benalla in particular has some fantastic tech hubs. Lots of places you were mentioning before about the way in which we can go into the larger regional towns and get fantastic service.
Tim, I was just thinking that as educators, I think we can see automation as an amazing opportunity to teach our students in a new way. But I can understand that from a parent's point of view, the fact that they don't know where those jobs are going to be in the future means that it's scary. And that then means that people fall back to what they know, which is why we end up going back to that, English maths sort of silo phenomenon.
Yeah, because it's what we know. It's what
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Innovation Science Australia did a study a few years ago now. Got the date there, have I? This is the Australia 2030 Prosperity Through Innovation study. In an age of automation, more jobs will demand 21st century skills such as interpersonal skills, entrepreneurialism, and creative problem-solving skills. It's interesting coming out of our federal government study there. In Scotland, they did this. They do a fair bit of research in creativity, and this is an interesting results of some of that. Creativity improves the self-esteem, motivation, and achievement of learners. Students who are encouraged to think creatively become more interested in discovering things for themselves, are more open to new ideas and challenges, are more able to solve problems, can work well with others, become more effective learners, and have greater ownership over their learning. Think about everything that's just been described there, and then think about what you want your students to, the skills you want them to have when they go into the future workplace, because that's what we're looking for. As employers, we're wanting people who can discover things for themselves, who are open to new ideas and challenges, can solve problems, can work well with others, and become more effective learners and have greater ownership over their own learning. That's exactly what we're wanting from future employees. Daryl saying Sir Ken's definition of education to enable students to understand the world around them and the talents within them so that they can become fulfilled individuals and active, compassionate citizens. There you go. What a great definition of education.
Well, that resonated with me in 2019. I was at the same conference, and that was one of his slides, and I thought, I've got to take a photo of that, and I did, and I've just been able to find that photo and reproduce it, and I thought that really ties in nicely with the slides you've got at the moment there, Tim.
So true. Very timely. Liz agrees. So Ken says we don't grow into creativity, we grow out of it, or rather we get educated out of it. Very sad statement. He's been saying that for a while, and unfortunately that has been the case for many people. This is an interesting definition here that Piaget, of course, everyone who's a teacher here would have studied Piaget at some point in time, hopefully. The principal goal of education is to create adults who are capable of doing new things, not simply of repeating what other generations have done. Adults who are creative, inventive, and discoverers. I love that definition too, and it fits in nicely with Sir Ken's definition. And of course, Piaget was the guru, and my guru besides Sir Ken is Seymour Papert, and I'll be talking about him just briefly as we finish up. Seymour Papert studied under Piaget. He did 3 PhD degrees, can you believe it? In mathematics too, all 3 of them. And he had some really interesting things to say. Seymour Papert says the role of the teacher is to create the conditions for invention rather than provide ready-made knowledge. And that's really powerful when you think about it and dwell on what that means. And I was so privileged as a young teacher back in 1992 when not DLTV, but CEGV, I think it was back then, when they invited Seymour Papert to come out and keynote the conference. I think it was the national conference at the time that Victoria were looking after. I'm pretty sure it was 1992. Kev might be able to do some quick research there. And Seymour Papert came out, and I was a young teacher. Because I was on the committee as a young teacher. I don't know why I was on the committee, but I was either that or I was just a member of CEGB. And I got to hear him, and didn't get to meet him, but I got to actually listen to the great man. Had no idea what impact that would make on me and my future career. But since then, I've read a lot of his work, read his book, a couple of his books, and been very, very impressed with him, and he's guided me into the work that I do now. And he was the one that invented the constructionist learning theory, the whole concept that to learn, the best way to learn is to make. The best way to learn is to be creative. And no matter what you're teaching, if you can give your students opportunities to create, then they're going to learn it better. And how much better are you going to be preparing those students for the future when you're giving them those opportunities to make things, to be creative, to think entrepreneurially? That's the way to prepare your students for the future, because we just don't know what that future is going to be, but we do know that we're giving them the skills and I guess the scaffold then to have that unknown future be available to them, and they'll be best prepared for it. I just wonder whether our current education system is really doing that well. Kev saying, and Pink Floyd, we didn't need no education. Good point. Yeah, no dark sarcasm in the classroom. Yeah, leave those kids alone. Well, that's probably going to extreme. 2004, really? Was it that recent? Okay. I had 1992 in my mind because I started teaching in 91. I just remember, I could be wrong. It could have been 2004. So there you go, folks. That is pretty much all I wanted to present to you, and I'm really pleased that we're able to have a bit of a chat. It wasn't such a one-way thing. It was nice to get your feeling of it. I've got a couple of things I'd like to just quickly share if I'm allowed to. We've started this new program last month called the Adobe Creative Educators Program, all aimed at encouraging creativity in education. Certainly not focused on teaching with Adobe tools as such. It's more on the concept of being a creative teacher. There's a 1-hour course that we run that just talks about creativity. It talks a lot about Sir Ken's messaging And we do an hour course on that, and then there's a little bit of homework. And if you do that course and come through it, you become an Adobe Creative Educator and part of our global community. And we launched the course 3 weeks ago, and guess what? 4,500 teachers are now Adobe Creative Educators. So it's just amazing to see how much interest there is. So that's one thing that we're trying to do to help teachers through this change, through this process. I'll just put the link into the chat in case you are interested.
I've done that, Tim.
Oh, thanks, mate. That was good. That's
no worries.
Good. Well
I've got a thing called Google.
well done. And I'll just do a quick promo for my show every Wednesday night. Of course, it's going to be a very different show tomorrow night with the Sir Ken tribute, but normally it's a very upbeat, very jovial show. It's a 30-minute chat show that we have with a guest. Usually it's an Adobe education leader, someone who works with our tools at a quite a high level, but we try to do something very simple, very basic, and then something a little bit challenging as well. We try to do something with the Spark tools, which are very basic, simple tools that anyone's got access to because they're free. They're browser-based, they're iOS-based, some of them are Android-based. And then we have a bit of a challenge with some of the more professional tools as well out there. So that's the Inject Creativity. So, Daryl, you haven't put that one in? Oh, no, you have. Good. Information about that.
Sorry.
No worries.
I got sore fingers, but I'm getting there.
And just finally, I'll leave this one up here. It's just if you want to be in touch with us, I do a newsletter once a month. If you'd like to get that newsletter, let me know. If you want to be on my email list to get that newsletter, or just to give me some feedback offline, that's a way of getting in contact with me. I've given you my email address at the start. That's just another way of being in contact with myself and my team. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Maybe allowing some Q&A time, and then we'll finish up.
Yes, if people have any questions or comments they'd like to make, that's the idea of these webinars. Just one thing I'd like to point out is too that Tim's done quite a few webinars for DLT on those tools he just mentioned quickly. If you go to the DLTV website, many of those fabulous ones, especially some of the ones Tim did on remote learning, they were just brilliant. So I would thoroughly recommend those. Just got some words of thanks from a couple of people, but if anyone's got some more comments or chat, please feel free. Kev, you look like you want to say something.
Just before people jump off the call and understand. Yeah, I do. So I'd just like to thank you again, Tim. You've been a fantastic support to teachers through these difficult times, through your webinars and your webinars with DLTV. And it's highly appreciated. And tonight was another example. I love the way you were able to weave in Ken Robinson, because he was a big thought leader for me over the years as well. So sad as it is, he's certainly made an impact. So Daryl and I and Tim will stay on the call for a little bit. If people do want to have a chat, please feel free to open your video and your mics. And I don't know if you're still recording, Tim.
Oh, yeah, I'll stop the recording now. Thanks, folks. If you're watching the recording, thank you for joining us. Maybe join us live next time. See you later.